This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Hey, I'm Trilby.
And I'm Crystal.
And you're listening to The Vibe Waco. Inspired by our experiences writing our online magazine, this podcast brings stories to life. Stories that inform, inspire, and connect our local community.
We'll shine a spotlight on small businesses, new ventures, nonprofits, and even the good humans we meet along the way.
So get ready to learn, laugh, and maybe even shed a tear.
Follow us on all social media platforms at The Vibe Waco and read our magazine at thevibewaco.com, because here at The Vibe Waco, we're more than just a podcast.
We're a whole vibe. Today, we're addressing a topic that's heavy but important: the elephant in the room, suicide.
It's a tough conversation, but one we can't shy away from. How do we break the stigma, support one another, and create space for a real talk?
Whether you've been affected personally or want to learn how to help, we're here to have the honest, compassionate conversation this topic deserves.
We chose this topic because not only are we hearing about it more and more, but it's happening in our own backyard. Let's dive in and start breaking down the walls. So we have our first guest.
I know.
Hey, I'm so excited. I didn't realize I was the first guest.
Yes.
And this is the first time
this is our first video. Like,
That's
it's a lot of firsts.
Yes, lots of
I'm
firsts.
so glad
You're breaking
to
us
be
in.
with a fur. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Not many firsts in life at this age anymore, and that's really cool.
That's
Yes.
awesome.
I'm pleased that you would have me.
Of
Okay.
course.
Would you introduce yourself and
I'm
give us a
Wesley
little...
Walker. I'm a licensed professional counselor psychotherapist here in town. Been in private practice about 25 years, I guess. I don't know. Done a lot of work with a lot of different populations. I've worked with kids. I've worked with geriatrics and couples and individuals, and pretty much run the gamut of all kinds of things that there are to deal with in the mental health world. Worked a lot with doctors and hospitals and treatment facilities, and just a whole lot of variety in terms of just varying forms of care. And so I've done a lot, and I do a podcast about mental health and addiction, in fact. And so this is the second time I've been in this chair in this week,
Just not
which
on
is
that
super
side.
fun, right? And
Right.
see, this is super awkward because this is not my chair. This is my partner's chair, and so I'm a little out of sync over here, but it's okay. Yeah.
Well, it suits you.
Thank
Yes.
I feel
Well,
like it's
share
good.
with everyone what your podcast is called.
So our podcast is called Facing the Mirror.
Mhm.
And basically it boils down to an honest look at things through the lens of mental health and addiction.
Mhm.
And just, I mean, we talk about so many different topics. In the last several sessions we've done, I found a list of things for 2025 that we want to do, like things to focus on, like what are habits you want to give up, or what are things you want to focus on, or things like that. And so we've been focusing on that, but we've also taken, there's a book of readings called I can't call the name of it, but it's a Melody Beatty book, and we've used these readings. So Gordon Harriman, who's on the podcast with me, is a 33-year sober AA member,
Mhm.
and he's been a participant, he's been a mentor, he's been a sponsor, he's been a sponsee, all these things. And anyway, he goes and speaks and he talks a whole lot about addiction. And so I'm not telling anything that he wouldn't tell on the podcast. I used to see him in my office years ago, and every time we talked in the office, and we had real intimate conversations, and we got to know each other well, and he's like, we ought to tape this stuff. and I laughed, and I was like, okay, yeah,
It's like
that's,
us. We should start a magazine.
Yeah.
we should talk, we
Yeah.
should tape that.
We get that.
And so we saw each other for a long time, and then he didn't come in anymore, and of course we have a lot of common friends in Waco, and so we ended up talking a lot outside of that over time, and he would mention it, and one day he randomly calls me and he's like, so were you serious about the podcast? And I was like, sure. What do you, I mean, I'm a big theater guy, and I've done a lot of that kind of stuff. So that stuff didn't bother. It wasn't the issue of that bothering me. It was like, what are we going to talk about? And so he's like, well, I'm glad you're interested because I've already had a meeting at Rogue and they want to meet you. I was like, okay, then. And so anyway, I came up and talked to these guys. And so as it turned out, Pete Sousa, who is very popular at Rogue, Pete is in recovery. Gordon's in recovery. And so they had talked about it. And they had teed it all up before they even knew that I would be willing. I guess Gordon knew I would be willing. And so anyway, so they teed it all up and talked to them at Rogue. And so I came in and just based on Gordon's and my banter, I guess, with each other, we kind of, of course, we have a very, very strong rapport. And we've talked for so long about so many things that we kind of read each other pretty well. And there's a nice flow and it very conversational and empathic and deep.
It's so good.
Comfortable.
So good.
Thank you. And so we ended up saying, hey, let's try this. And now I think I texted him happy 20th episode about 5 episodes ago.
That's awesome.
So we're
That's
like
so
25
exciting.
or something now. And so we've been really excited because we've been having several hundred downloads a month.
Wow.
Which has been kind of a huge thing. We've been really, because ultimately my perspective of the podcast was to give people an inside look at what psychotherapy can be like.
Yeah.
Because, there's been such a stigma around mental health
Yes,
for so
absolutely.
long that, and things have changed. I'm sorry, I'm a little ADD and I'll be all over the place, but over the course of the time that I've been in practice, I've seen a significant shift in the general perspective of mental health care.
Yes.
And for years, it was very hard for us to get people in the door and even harder for us to keep them because there was such a stigma. People would think, oh, I'm not crazy. And especially when I was working with kids, right? Teenagers especially, they were real, reluctant. And so I always have said that I can kind of talk to a tree stump. And when they get in my office and they figure out it's not what they thought it was going to be, it's fine. But it was the getting them in the office process that was huge.
Yes.
And so once we started this podcast, I thought, oh, what a great opportunity to give people a perspective of what psychotherapy can be and sort of dispel the fears and dispel the negative perspective people have around that kind of thing and understand that we can be real, that we are real, that
Yes.
we have our own concerns and I have always shared with people my perspective of psychotherapy is built around relationship.
Yeah.
I think relationship is my gift. And I hate to put it that way. I don't mean that arrogantly. It's just that relationship is so important, especially, and I tell people if you expect me to believe you, you need to believe me. You need to know me. How in the world am I going to expect you to come in and share your most intimate concerns and fears and all the things that bother you if you don't have any idea who I am? I'm not a head nodder. I'm not the guy that goes, yeah, how does that make you feel?
Right.
I'll say, how does it make you feel? And then I'll laugh real loud after that because it's so cliche, right? And then I'll explain to my people, it's like, well, I really want to know how that makes you feel, but it's just kind of funny because that's what media makes us out to be kind of strange.
Yes.
Right? There's always
You don't think you're strange? No,
oh, honey, we all know I'm strange. I'm trying to be professional right now.
He's wearing his jacket.
I'm wearing my dress clothes and all that. We laugh a lot on our podcast. And so, we have a sign. See, my brain jumps all over everywhere. We have a sign in our secretary's office that's Mary Englebright that says, let's put the fun back in dysfunctional.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
yes, we get
I've said that a million times.
That's what we attempt. That's what we attempt to do. Is always not make light of it, but I always think that the positive stuff is equally as important as the negative stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because people come in my office, rarely if ever, do people come in my office in a good space. but I always want to try to let them leave my office in a better space.
Yeah.
It might not be good. It might not be perfect. It might not be where they want to go, but we're going to get you out of here on a lighter note. We're going to make you feel better. We're going to, because tomorrow isn't promised.
That's right.
Next week isn't promised, and I think that goes into, interestingly enough, this topic we're wanting to discuss, which is suicide. And, you mentioned the elephant in the room, the big pink elephant in the room. I talk about that a lot in the office because there are so many different elephants in the room for people, right?
Yeah.
And so many
We already
things.
had a list going.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Long
So many things that people don't want to talk about. And over the course of so many years, I've heard a lot of those, pink elephant stories. And a lot of times it takes quite a while to build enough of a relationship with a person for them to start to reveal that really difficult stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, clearly I think, but psychotherapy is so important. But it's also more, for me, I mean, insurance companies have focused a lot on short-term care and all of that over time for reimbursement purposes. But I've always felt like, and I guess I'm a little old school in that way, that psychotherapy should be an ongoing process. And it isn't, and I don't want to make it such that everything we discuss when you come to therapy is negative. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
Right. And that's part of what I wanted to do around the idea of our podcast. And that's the reason we called it Facing the Mirror, because so oftentimes we don't want to look in the mirror.
That's right. Yes.
And the mirror has so many connotations for us externally and internally. Like we all want everybody to think we're pretty and that we look nice, and we check the mirror going out the door.
Filters.
Of course.
Yeah.
Highlight reel.
Absolutely. Oh, right there.
Yes.
Highlight reel.
Mm-hmm.
That shifts my ADD brain back to suicide, right? Yeah. I think so much of what kids are dealing with nowadays is the highlight reels on social media.
It is.
And it's terrible.
The highlight reel, and then the bullying, the keyboard warriors, the things that we would never say to another human being in their face.
I don't think it's just kids either.
No,
I think
no.
it's everybody.
Yeah.
Like,
and so
you paid attention to politics lately?
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
it's
just
awful.
the neighborhood groups. I'm like so over
yeah,
it.
like what? Where's your humanity? And I will say that. And I started an education blog 13 years ago, and honestly, it took off. And in that world, you're known as like edu-famous.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that word.
I know. And I became a speaker, and my keynote was actually on self-preservation and joy, which was amazing because I got to go speak to teachers about that and not necessarily how to teach. And so, but my website took off because I was so vulnerable. It wasn't a highlight reel. I'll say, well, this was a whole mess, and we had to scrap it and start over. And people connected with me because they could come to my website, they could read my stories. I'm sharing every season of life, the positive, the suffering, all the things. And they would leave not feeling bad about themselves. Not saying that those other websites out there that are beautiful and magical and everything looks like it's come through a photo shoot, they're not great. They're fine. Everything has its purpose, but I mean, it's kind of funny to be known back then as being popular for being a hot mess. That literally is what
Hot Mess Express.
Yes. And I said
great.
that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really do that anymore. I've pivoted, but I'm still very vulnerable, and I think I always will be because I'm not scared to be.
Vulnerable to me in my office and in my world is very equal to authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think being authentic is what draws people in. And I think that's part of the reason that I do what I do. And I tell people I'm not a head nodder, right? I'm going to talk to you. I'm not going to talk with you. I'm not going to talk at you, and if you have questions about me, ask me. I'm not here to hide behind my role or, because I want to dispel the stigmas, right? Like, I'm a person just like you. I just happen to have a license to do this, and I've done it a lot, right? And a lot of times I used to have an ottoman in my office that had these big buttons on it, right? And especially with older kids, I would say, you're here and I'm here. And these are potholes in your life, right? These buttons, right? Kids, well, people always seem to respond to visuals.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, so that's a pothole in your life. And I'm just here to tell you to step around it. And the only reason I can tell you
I love that.
is because I've fallen
too.
into it.
Right.
Right. And I'm not trying to run your life. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm just telling you that that's a deep hole. It's hard to get out, and it's going to hurt when you hit the bottom. And I'm going to tell you that multiple times. We're going to talk about it. We may even walk up to the hole and look in. Right. And then I'm going to let you go. And if you choose to go fall in that hole, I'm going to walk over there and laugh at you and tell you, I told you so. And then I'm going to help you out.
Yeah.
Right. And then I'm going to go, now you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
Right. I wasn't trying to run your life or tell you you shouldn't have done this or that, because oftentimes what I say, especially to kids, is very similar to what their parents say.
Oh, I was just thinking that same thing.
It's just coming from somebody else,
Yeah.
right? And oftentimes I'll communicate with parents and kind of get on their page and figure out how it is they conduct themselves with their kids and all of that. And I set up with parents, in front of the kid often. It's like, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and what we talk about in here is confidential. And if I'm concerned about your safety or someone else's, then I'm going to talk to your parents if they're minors. But I'm never going to throw you under the bus. We're going to discuss it beforehand. And I'm probably going to go, hey, we probably ought to talk to your parents about that. But some of that, a lot of that is just giving the kid the idea of control.
Right.
Of having control, because so often they feel like they haven't got any control.
Fight or flight.
And we go back to that whole suicide discussion, right? Like, I think a lot of people who end up taking their lives feel as though they've lost control.
Yeah.
In multiple areas of their lives, scenarios, things that spun out of their control, and then oftentimes I think it has to do with a perceived lack of support.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is really a lack of support, but oftentimes it's a perceived lack of support. And I think what's become really apparent for me is over time having the discussions with people whose family members have taken their life, and the aftermath that's left for people who go through that is so traumatic.
Yes.
And it's really true. The unanswered questions, no one can answer the question why.
Right.
There are no answers to that question.
Yeah.
There might be some supposition, right? Like, you can kind of put 2 and 2 together, but it never quite equals 4. It might be 3.38 or it might be 4.12, but it isn't ever right on the money, right? You never know all the details. You never know all of that. And so loved ones who would have wanted to help are always left with, I wish that I could have done more, or why didn't I know, or I didn't pay attention. There's lots of guilt around suicide for those left behind.
Yeah.
And another thing, and forgive me, jump in anytime, because
No, you're good.
I'm
You're
just
good.
a talker. And so a lot of times there's a perception that suicide is selfish. And a lot of times people say, oh, that was just so selfish. I can't believe they did that. That's the easy way out. They're a coward, all of those things. Well, if you've ever encountered people who were in a journey that possibly ended in suicide, those people are never in that headspace.
Right.
They're always in, I'm a burden.
Yes.
People don't need to deal with me. They don't want to deal with me. I don't want them to deal with me. I feel guilty for being a burden. I don't want to hurt them anymore. And that's it, right? Like, they don't take into consideration how much that action is going to hurt afterward, of course. But it's never focused. Well, it's not ever directly focused on them. It's indirectly focused on them because pain is selfish.
Right.
Pain is
Mhm.
very self-absorbing, right? And so when a person is in physical pain or psychological pain, doesn't matter, you are focused on figuring out how to alleviate that pain.
Right.
If you've ever talked to anybody with chronic pain, or if you guys have ever experienced that,
Yes.
you know, the over and over and over again
It's
nature
exhausting.
of
Mhm.
chronic pain is absolutely terrible.
Yes.
Exhausting, you're right.
Yep.
And so when you translate that, well, you know, to psychological pain, carrying that around and looking at the world through the lens of I'm not important, I'm not valued, these people don't care, no one cares about me, I don't care about myself, you know, all of those things. And then whatever leads them to actually finally commit the act, right? Sometimes it's planned, sometimes it's a long thought out thing, and sometimes it's extremely just impulsive.
Yeah.
You know, and so there again, the why, right? Like,
Yeah.
why did it happen? We don't ever know, you know. But and we're talking about this off camera a little while ago, is that it just seems like that suicide is picked up a lot, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
And Trilby and I were talking about this the other day when we were texting, but there are just so many things in the world that are indicative of unrest and a lack of security and safety. And, you know, people are so at odds with each other that there's no sense of just general stability out there.
Right.
If you don't have a group of people or a support system around you that creates a sense of stability for you, being alone out in this crazy world or feeling alone in this world the way it is now
It's like a constant spiral.
is, yes, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult. And, you know, these things have gone on always, right? These circumstances have gone on always. But I think that social media and
Oh, gosh.
the
Yes.
instant access to information has really created a huge influx in that kind of thing. And you go back to the highlight reel, right? Like, kids are so into comparison.
Yes.
And they are so shaming and they're so, you know, like, and they're all feeling that way, which is sad, but we all feel like we've got to put forth our best face, and we've got to show everybody we're so wonderful and successful
and it comes
happy.
from parents and adults that are modeling that and
150%.
trying to break that off. I mean, I've never cared about labels or anything like that, but I do wear nice things, but I guarantee you 99% of them came off of a clearance rack. And so...
Or from shameless plug for another season,
Right.
my favorite, you know,
Yes,
resale
absolutely.
place.
Well, this year when we were school shopping, my 6-year-old going into first grade was like, I want to wear all Under Armour. I'm like, how do you even know what that means? Like, what? And I didn't experience that with my older kids. It like, you know, Walmart, whatever. But him already at this age being so opinionated about his appearance, how he dresses, and the brand, it just blows my mind. And so we have to have like a lot of unpacking conversations where, you know, trying to help him understand that that really doesn't matter and how not to get wrapped up in like, how do you even have that conversation with a 6-year-old? You know, that comparison game, or like, you're too young for that. And then, yeah. And so as parents, you know, we're trying to have more conversations with him now. And we've talked about the scary thing about, you know, just being parents and kids today.
It's terrifying.
It is. And I don't know. I mean, I'm a super fan of therapy because we adopted through foster care. We were in therapy before and after adoption for years. And even, you know, we were in therapy last year because Bennett was struggling with anxiety. And so
I've done that work, and it's wonderful, wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful work.
And so, I mean,
Hard work, but wonderful work.
We're team that all the way. And as a parent, though, I mean, we talked about how because of keyboard warriors and because of overexposure, and then even exposing our kids now to just sex and all the things. Like, they are overexposed at an early
Everything
age.
comes too early.
Yes. And I think, I don't know because I haven't read statistics, but I would think that for children and teenagers who are committing suicide, it is more impulsive
Mhm.
because it's the reaction to whatever it is. And
And
so,
based on so much perceived pressure.
yes.
Perceived pressure.
Yes.
Perceived pressure.
Perceived
Yes.
pressure. Like, I talk to my kids about this
Mhm.
because.
In what
like,
way? Talk to me about that.
So, like, and I'm very open with my kids, and I talk about everything in front of them. Like, you know, I'm very open about bullying and just pressure, like, to just what they're thinking in their mind really isn't how it really is.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
They really are good at what they're doing. And those people aren't thinking that. Are there bullies? Yes. But some of that is a mental. Some of that's you telling yourself that. So, like, and I don't share a lot of things about my kids because that was an agreement that I made whenever I started this podcast. But I'm really big on, in the morning, you talking to yourself. You tell yourself you're good,
Affirmations.
you're smart. And I know it sounds so crazy, but as parents, I know I'm not the only one that's terrified of suicide and terrified of all the mental things, and anything extra that I can give my kids to try to help them to get through, I'm going to try to do it. And I've struggled with mental things. I'm very open that I've went to therapy. You know, I've had a traumatic childhood, and I've spent 7 years in counseling in my 20s. And even whenever I was a teenager, I went to counseling, and I take medication, and I'm very open about that. So whenever it comes to having kids, that's the one thing I've really been terrified of. I think almost more than anything. And I kind of joke to people, like, if I can just get my kids through high school, you know, without being on drugs and not getting a girl pregnant and, you know, believing in God, then I feel like I've done my duties. And yes, I want them to make good grades and all the things, but that's really, those are the big things that scare me. And so with them, I've tried to give them the things that I didn't have, like telling themselves that you're good enough, because I do think a lot of it's mental. I mean, in their mind, they think that my kids aren't like this, but I know other, like Bennett.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about brand names. In his mind, he thinks it's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's perceived pressure.
Well, and I always ask him when he says something, I always say, okay, tell me what that means. So if he is talking about something like, I am this or they are that or whatever, I will say, well, what does that mean? Like the first time he heard bully, he's like, I got in trouble for bullying. And I said, well, what does it mean to be a bully? And, you know, my degree is in early childhood, so I nerd out at all
I
the...
have a minor in early childhood.
Yes, and so I nerd out with all the brain stuff.
And developmental stuff, yeah.
Yes,
What's
yes,
appropriate
yes.
in stages
Exactly.
and all those things, yeah.
And so consistently, and I think for a lot of parents, it's really just lack of knowledge. Like, they don't understand what children are capable of at a young age. They don't understand how much of their brain is developed before age 5, or linguistically what they're capable of and how to break things down in their little brains. And so that's a conversation that I probably have daily of, okay, well, what does that mean? And if he can't express what it means, I want him to say, well, what does that? I say, well, what does that look like? Or
what I call that is a teachable moment. You're making those things teachable.
Right. Oh, I used to be a kindergarten teacher.
There you go.
It's rooted in me, but yeah, just because what he thinks it is not what it is. And that one word that he really is using wrong, feeling wrong, all the things can wreck him.
Oh my gosh, my brain is just blowing up with all these things. Let me circle back to what Trilby was saying a minute ago about talking to yourself. One of the things I talk about with people, adults, kids, no matter who it is I've always referred to it as the tape we play in our head. You know, and if you're of a certain age, you remember the old, Is it live or is it Memorex? You guys may be too young for that. I don't know. But anyway, so we play a tape in our head, right? And between 0 and, I don't know, 5 years old, which is a real pivotal developmental stage, there is a lot that gets recorded on that tape.
Yep.
Right? Because, they always say that kids are so susceptible to learning language at a certain point, right? When their brain is so like receptive, like a sponge. And so what gets recorded on that tape in those critical years is what plays on that tape for the rest of their life.
Oh my gosh, I talk about this on
So terrifying.
Well, so in our group, the Vibe Waco, we have a Facebook group. So I'm a business and mindset coach, and I've went through some neuro-linguistic training and certification. And so every Monday I go live at 9:00 at night and do Mindset Monday. And that is something that I've been talking about for weeks, that, understanding how much is programmed in us early, and how to, like this week it was over reframing your
Love
mindset.
that word.
And
Cognitive
so,
reframes.
yes.
Yeah.
And so I was teaching them what reframing is and then how it works. And so examples I always use are, when you were little and your mom said, I'll think about that. What does that mean to you? It's not going to happen. Or when you hear the word but, I like it, but automatically you shut it. It's done. And so
I always say but's an eraser word.
Yeah.
It erases everything before it, right?
Yeah, but usually you expect the after to not be something necessarily positive. And so talking about mindset and reframing things in a way that puts you in a more peaceful space for functioning. And that is something that we've been talking about for weeks. And that's something I also do in coaching. I think sometimes I do more mindset coaching than I do business coaching. So a lot of times people struggle with success because of their mindset. And I'm always like, let's break this down. Like I have a plan, but then there's days where I'm like, okay, we're going to shut the computer and where is this block coming from? But I think within this bigger topic, especially for adults, we get a block and we stay there. And we don't know how to unpack it. We don't know who to unpack it with. And when you were saying 2 + 2 doesn't always equal 4, well, I think even if you get to as the family or friend, and you get to the 3.8, that doesn't mean to you it's rational or it makes sense. So it's still hard to process. Because even though you wish you could have done something, it's still whatever it was, the way they felt.
Well, your cognitive response
Yes.
and your emotional response are not necessarily the same thing.
Exactly. Yep.
Let me circle back a minute for that, the tape issue. What we talk about, the way I characterize it in the office in terms of talking about the tape is, yes, there's a lot recorded on the tape before, let's just use age 5, right? And so if you think about it, I always talk in word pictures because it seems to help people understand things, right? So when you're young, that tape is real short, right? Like it's a small loop. And as you get older, the loop gets longer, right? Like the more age you have on you, the more you experience, the more you've put on your tape, right? You can't erase the tape, but you can record on the tape, right? And if you look at it like a loop, so when you're young, and if the tape is filled with lots of negative things, then that's what goes on in your head because the tape is real short and it keeps playing over and over, right? The longer you go, the more there is on the tape. And the longer it takes for that bad stuff to come back around, right? It's going to come back
Such a good
around.
analogy.
It's going to come back
Such a
around.
good analogy.
But if you choose what you record on your tape, then you can have a whole bunch of good. That bad stuff might come back around eventually. But the longer your tape gets, you have a whole lot of control over what you put on your tape.
Yeah.
After those scenarios have happened and things have gotten recorded on your tape, you still have a whole lot of control over what you put on it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vibe Waco. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And let us know your thoughts. Do you love it or do you hate it?
Be sure to read this article in our online magazine, The Vibe Waco, which can be found at thevibewaco.com. You can find this podcast anywhere you can find podcasts or at roguemedianetwork.com. Until next time, Waco, keep it real because we're a whole vibe.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.